Okay, so today we're diving into a text that doesn't just disagree with a common idea, it basically declares war on it. The title is The Divorce Deception, and its argument is about as blunt as you can get. It really goes after a narrative that, for a lot of people, is a necessary comfort. So let's get into it and break down what this argument is all about. Right out of the gate, the source material throws its knockout punch. And this quote, it's not just some opening line, it's the entire argument right there, in a nutshell. You see, the author isn't trying to ease you into their point. Nope, they're dropping a verdict from the get-go, and this one confrontational idea is the foundation for everything that comes next. So, you might be wondering, how does an argument this explosive even get started? Well, the source doesn't kick things off with, a bunch of data or research. Instead, it starts by pointing a finger, a very direct finger. This isn't some high-level abstract debate. It's framed as a personal accusation. And right here is where the author draws a really important line in the sand. They're not saying you can't get a divorce, legally speaking. That's not the point. What they're really going after is the story people tell themselves and others about why they're doing it. The argument is basically, sure, you can do it, but you don't get to wrap it in a narrative that the author believes is a flat-out lie. Okay, let's get to the absolute core of this whole thing. The author hones in on one single, very common phrase, and they don't just say it's wrong, they call it a deliberate, calculated deception. So what is this false narrative they're talking about? Well, it's that very common justification we've all heard. We're doing this in the best interests of the kids. The source doesn't just question this, it calls it a straight-up lie. And not just that, it argues this justification is actually the worst possible thing for the children. And this really lays out the two opposing views perfectly, doesn't it? On one side, you have the common narrative, right? That this is a really tough but ultimately necessary step for the family's health. But then you look at the author's claim, and it's a completely different story. They see it as a self-serving lie, a way to justify your own wants at the expense of everyone else, especially the kids. All right, so after calling out the main lie, the author then starts to zoom in. They take a magnifying glass to the specific excuses they say people use to justify it all, and they start tearing them down one by one. And they don't just talk in vague terms either. The text gets really specific, calling out what you might even call cliché scenarios. The neglected wife who says she needs to find herself, or the husband who feels his wife doesn't desire him anymore. The source basically looks at these and says, nope, those aren't real reasons. Those are just convenient excuses for a selfish decision. Wow, this quote really gets to the heart of the author's demand, doesn't it? It's not asking for a change of heart. It's demanding an admission of guilt. The wording is so intentional, so harsh. Claim the misery. The goal is to force the parent to, in the author's view, take full responsibility for the damage they're causing. So really, when you get right down to it, here's what the author is saying. All those justifications, they're just a smokescreen. The real reasons, according to this text, are a lot less noble. It's about giving up, breaking promises, and forcing your kids to live with what the author calls a lifetime of trauma, all for your own selfish reasons. But the argument doesn't just stop with individuals. Oh no, the author widens their scope a lot. They start pointing fingers at a major social institution, claiming it's actually helping this deception along. Right, so the idea here is that this divorce deception, as they call it, couldn't survive in a vacuum. The author claims it's found a safe space, a sanctuary even, inside the church itself. And that's a huge escalation, right? The blame is now being shifted from just the person to the entire institution. And here's how the author lays out their case against the church. They basically describe this domino effect of failure. It all starts, they say, with churches being too scared to preach what the text calls the actual gospel on this topic, because they're afraid of losing members and their donations. So that fear leads them to do nothing, to not step in. And then, in what the author sees as the worst-case scenario, some churches don't just stay quiet. They actually celebrate the person, which basically gives this false narrative a stamp of approval. Okay, so after all of that, after tearing everything down, what's the alternative? What does the author want people to do instead? Well, as we're about to see, it's not so much a solution as it is a demand for a very raw, almost brutal kind of honesty. And this is the final demand. It's just as blunt as the opening statement. That whole best for the kids story, the author says you can't just tweak it or rephrase it, it has to go. Completely. In their view, there's no middle ground here. It's a lie, and it needs to be replaced by a truth that's frankly really hard to hear. And this is the honest statement the author suggests. It is absolutely designed to be a gut punch. It reframes the whole thing, not as a new beginning, but as a total admission of failure. The idea is that you are making a conscious choice to take a burden that you couldn't handle and place it directly on your kids. That is the painful truth this entire text has been leading up to. So, at the end of all this, we're left with a really challenging question, one that this text pretty much forces you to think about. If a story, a narrative, gives people comfort during an incredibly difficult time, what's the value of a truth that seems to only cause more pain? That's really the heart of the conflict here, and it's definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown.